Joining me now is Robert Taylor, political commentator. Rob, really good to talk to you.
Hello, David.
Can I just talk about what is going on? So we've got a mega poll here showing just how badly Labour would do. This is the first big poll we've seen since Labour came into power. So they go from 411 seats down to 228. That pretty much puts them neck and neck with the Tories. Reform goes up to 72, the Lib Dems on 58. What is interesting about that poll is also the number of cabinet ministers who would lose their seats as a result. We would see people like Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, go. Couldn't happen to a nicer lady. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. John Healey. Defence, Ed Miliband would be out as well. Energy Secretary Bridget Phillipson. Jonathan Reynolds. That should concentrate minds in the Labour Party, shouldn't it?
Well, it certainly should. I mean, they've been a terrible government, the worst in my lifetime so far in the first 5 or 6 months. We gave them a brief honeymoon period to see what they were going to do, and it quickly transpired that they had over-promised by a country mile in the election campaign and then under-delivered by an equal margin. So the biggest thing, David, I think we can learn from this poll is that the scales have fallen from the eyes of the British voters.
I think I'm really struck by the call. I don't know if you heard it from Catherine, who's a farmer, who was getting very emotional about how much effort they'd put into their farm. They'd built it up from nothing. Her husband is not in great health now. They can't afford to pay the son who is working on the farm. And yet you have a Labour government saying that, oh, we're only 500 farms are going to be affected because their farm's over £1 million. I just don't understand why the government, which has had so long to think about policies, has such a lack of understanding about most policies, and particularly policies that affect the rural countryside.
Yeah, I'm with you entirely on that. And it's for a relatively small amount of money that the Labour government is going to earn or save through these measures. The same with VAT on school fees. It looks as though they've just got their sort of bogeymen out there, and they say, we don't like the rural areas, we don't like people who send their kids to private schools, we don't really much like private enterprise, so we're going to whack up national insurance. And they're just doing what the left often does, I'm afraid, and it never works.
And of course we're seeing an increasing number of people working for the state sector. We're going to talk later about the numbers of people, particularly those people not in education, employment or training, the welfare bill that we are being forced to foot. But also just in terms of Starmer generally, it seems to me their policies, and if you are in opposition for so long, surely you would hit the ground running and you would come up with things that are really important, that would garner support across the country. You're right, they have cherry-picked their bogeymen, those ideological campaigns that I suppose the far left would think are mostly important.
So it would seem that, and I was wondering, I mean, I've been against the idea of a Starmer government since Starmer came in to office as the head of the Labour Party, and I've been warning people through my writing that I didn't think he could be trusted, that he was a flip-flopper, that he would flip-flop again when he got into power. But they were so confident, the Labour Party, and Starmer particularly during the election campaign, that even I was wondering, have they got something up their sleeve? Have they got some magic formula that's going to sort out the country's problems? Well, of course they don't. And that's what a lot of us were saying beforehand. But they conned a lot of people in the process, hence their massive majority.
Now, one of the biggest problems, we've talked about the economy. The fact is that we've seen no growth in the last quarter. We believe that we're heading into a recession. Rachel Reeves with that budget, which has terrified people. And of course, she is saying they're going to come back for more money, or they may be forced to do that. One of the other big electoral issues, and the reason Reform is doing so well, is immigration. There is no doubt about that. We know that 3 migrants died, another 3 which is a terrible human tragedy, whilst trying to cross the channel to the UK. We saw huge numbers of police, firefighters, ambulance crews near Sangatte. And now the Labour government says, oh, we're going to get tough on immigration, we're going to smash the gangs. And yet more than 150,000 illegal migrants have crossed since the small boats crisis began. At Christmas Day and Boxing Day, we saw 858. If they don't get on top of this, and another policy they did the minute they got in was scrap Rwanda, the only deterrent that we had.
Yeah, and Rwanda, I'm quite sure, wasn't perfect, but we know that it was having an effect because the Irish government was complaining about it and saying that migrants were coming all the way through the UK, through the Northern Ireland border into the Republic of Ireland because they didn't want to stay in the UK in case it was shoved back to Rwanda. So we know that the message was getting through and Rwanda needed to be allowed to do its business. But Labour government abolished it. They said with this empty slogan, we're going to smash the gangs. Well, we've already had 50 migrants losing their lives in the Channel this year. It's about 50, 3 more just yesterday. How many more deaths are we going to suffer before we realise that we need to disincentivise people from coming across the Channel?
And yet the response from the Labour government is we're working with our European partners. We're actually putting in things like a border command. I don't see any evidence of it having any effect.
No, I don't either. I see nothing working at all from this Labour government. As I say, Rwanda wasn't given a fair chance. Labour abolished it before the flights had really taken off at all. In my opinion, we should have kept Rwanda. We should have kept going with that. We should have kept up the disincentive. That was, in my opinion, beginning to work. I think it would have worked, but we didn't give it a chance, and now Labour are paying the price.
What do you think they're going to do? Because I was just reading in terms of the numbers of hotels, they've opened more hotels since they took office. They've opened more hotels for asylum seekers than it's closed. It's gone from 213 up to 220. That was in the first 4 months since they were in power. Do you think they believe they can solve it?
With this Labour government, I really don't know what they really believe. I know that they've been impressed, or they say they've been impressed by what Meloni is doing in Italy. They've established returns agreements with Albania, and apparently that is making a difference, and we have more returns than before.
But that was done before they came into office. And actually, in terms of Meloni, what she's doing is offshore processing, which is something mooted by other political parties.
Exactly right. So if they're going to do what Meloni is doing, they're going to displease the left wing of their own party, and they're going to displease the human rights laws, and they're going to displease those who hold up signs saying refugees welcome, which just encourages more people to risk their lives coming across the Channel. I have no faith in this Labour government when it comes to small boat crossings at all.
Can I just get your opinion on something else? Council staff are being allowed to work from the beach. More than 2,000 times since the pandemic. Apparently, town hall bosses approved at least 731 staff requests to work from abroad in 2023. This sounds rather wonderful if you are one of those workers. I was reading they've been in very exotic places indeed, working from France, for example, working from further flung places. I just don't understand how you are allowed to work from a sunny country when you are paid by the state, by the hard-working taxpayer, and yet Labour ministers refuse to condemn it.
And is it any wonder, David, that according to the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, public sector productivity is 8.5% lower than pre-COVID levels? Just think about it. It's gone down nearly 10% since early 2020, and yet still we allow people on the public purse, on taxpayers' money, council taxpayers' money, to work in Ibiza or even Australia, I understand.
And Barbados. And Barbados. I mean, town halls have doubled down, saying they can monitor employees' performance from abroad, and offering the perk was crucial for hiring and retaining staff in a competitive environment. I don't buy it.
Nor do I buy it. And I think people, if they're going to earn taxpayers' money for council work, wherever they are in the country, they need to be in the office. They cannot be, for heaven's sake, in Ibiza.
And can I just ask you, in terms of the numbers, I talked about the 925,000 people, young people not in education, employment or training, the sheer huge numbers of people who are off sick because they're off sick because they feel they are not well enough to work. This is a crisis. It's a national emergency, and Labour needs to get on top of it.
Yeah, they do. The Tories also needed to get on top of that. I mean, I don't think the Tories can complain about 2.7 million people being off work on disability allowances. It happened under the Tories' watch as well. But it's no wonder that we're having to get so much immigration. We got over 2 million, nearly 3 million people out of work being paid because apparently they're not well enough to work. Now, I'm sure that's the case with some of them, but nearly 3 million people too ill to work. These are people of working age. Cannot be right.
And we're going to talk more about that, the rising epidemic of young people too ill to work, at about 3 o'clock. More on that a little later on. Can we talk about the Chagos Islands? It seems to me that actually a lot of these policies have been rushed through. They've been enacted very quickly without any real thought. There's a big story today in the Daily Mail where Mauritius has been demanding £800 million a year, billions of pounds in reparations too. This is part of the Chagos Islands deal. Now, Downing Street refusing to say how much money it is actually going to cost. Now, just to remind people, essentially it looks like we are paying Mauritius to have a 99-year lease on the Chagos Islands, even though we have a very strategically important military base in Diego Garcia. The incoming Trump administration absolutely livid about this being given away, ill thought through, and now is the chance to actually renege on that, to say that since the deal hasn't been ratified, we need to rethink this.
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting because Trump's going to be in power, in about 25 days' time or something. And we know that he doesn't like this deal. It might be convenient for Starmer to please his colleagues in international law to go with their recommendation. But it seems to me that this goes against British interests. And certainly, David, if the figure of £800 million a year rent on that base is anything like true, well, clearly Britain cannot do that. It's an outrageous amount of money for Mauritius to be demanding. And let's bear in mind, there's no real reason why these islands should belong to Mauritius anyway, as far as I can see.
Well, I would agree. And also, I'm not sure that they ever belonged to Mauritius, but this was all part of the United Nations General Assembly in 2019 adopting a non-binding resolution saying it's part of Mauritius. It's been rushed through. Why the urgency?
A very good question, David. I don't know. All I can say about that is that the Tories were looking at this as well. It's another area where the Tories really can't claim to be on the right side here because they were looking at this deal. All right, Boris Johnson ruled it out. But under Liz Truss and then under Rishi Sunak, we were looking at making this deal under the Tories as well.
Well, you're right. And it was James Cleverly, actually, who expedited it.
Indeed. So will it actually go ahead? It's very interesting to see because we know as soon as Trump comes in, he's probably going to say, I don't want it to go ahead.
I mean, that's fascinating just in terms of timing, whether they can get that signed off before Trump comes in. But obviously, as you say, time is running out. Just going back to Keir Starmer, how long's he got, do you think?
Well, Labour do not appear to be as ruthless in getting rid of their leaders
they never
as
are.
the Tories are. And of course, he's got this massive majority. So he could say, job done, I'm now putting in this hard left agenda, although, of course, it's not hard left enough for many of his supporters. So he might well say, trust me. But if polls like that carry on, David, that we saw just at the weekend, with his majority being slashed, then I think people in the Labour Party will get very itchy about it, and you could have Wes Streeting or Angela Rayner think to themselves, I fancy the top job. Let's see if we can give Keir Starmer the boot.
Well, it's interesting because I went back and had a look at some notes, but Wes Streeting, this was written in 2023, last year. Wes Streeting revealed he does harbour ambitions to be Prime Minister one day, saying he would die happy if he had the chance to be Labour leader.
Well, I'm sure most top politicians would like the top job. Some of them recognise they haven't got what it takes. And I would have thought Rachel Reeves's ambitions have been rather slaughtered in the last few months. But Streeting definitely is a contender. Angela Rayner, I would have thought, is a contender. There will be others as well. And Starmer, he needs to get his act together. He's been an appalling Prime Minister so far. He's disappointed his own side. He's disappointed the rest of us. He's got to get his act together very quickly, or within a year or so, David. You asked me how long. I'd say a year or so, he could be facing severe difficulties.